Please become a Patreon and support the show. Merci.
And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
Last week, Animal Farm had as its guest Leo Marks, and we spent quite a bit of the interview discussing advocacy for Senate Bill 805. And Leo had mentioned the almost holy trinity of advocates for that legislation, which would be Martha Dempson, Beatrice Casagran, and Vanessa Stewart. And after the recording, Leo contacted me and said he deeply regrets not mentioning a fourth and equally important part of that advocacy team, and that's Emmanuel Deliage, the executive director of CASA 0101. This week, we're joined by Myron Meisel, who has had a varied and interesting life in the theater and in movies. Myron is a graduate of the Harvard Law School. He practiced law for many years. He was also, as a 20-year-old, a film critic for the Boston Phoenix. He went on to become the founding film critic for the Chicago Reader and later for the Los Angeles Reader. He then became the theater critic for the Hollywood Reporter for several years before becoming a theater critic and commentator for Stage Raw. Myron Meisel, welcome to Animal Farm.
Hello, Stephen. It's good to see you. And frankly, I'm finding it good to see anybody.
I know the feeling, even through the lens of Zoom. It's better than nothing.
It's our new substitute for intimacy.
Yep. You have an extraordinary background. I would like to start. You could be said as a theater critic, and a critic in general. You are a spiritual leader. Any good theater critic is, but you were literally a spiritual leader. You served as what is perhaps the youngest rabbi in Judaic history, and I was wondering if you could tell that story.
My goodness. I was raised as an observant conservative Jew.
This is in New Jersey, correct?
This is in New Jersey.
Yeah.
I didn't move to New Jersey. Well, I moved to New Jersey by the time I was 2.
By the time you were, I'm sorry?
2.
You moved when you were 10. You had the autonomy as a 2-year-old to decide where you were going to move.
No, my parents moved.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Well, in any event, I was raised as an observant Jew in the conservative tradition, and my sense of Jewish identity to this day remains a very strong and essential part of my sense of self. Although I happen to be a committed atheist, I find no genuine emotional contradiction between praying on the high holidays and not believing in God. I find them completely consistent and highly utilitarian.
Okay, so how did you get to be a rabbi?
Well, I was, our temple was essentially a fire trap that ought to have been condemned. So as Jews will do, they raised money and built a new building. And it was decided, as Jews are wont, that they should open the building by honoring the young people. So the first service that dedicated the temple and consecrated it was actually conducted by students rather than the regular rabbi and cantor. So I served as the rabbi on that occasion.
And you were, at this juncture, how old?
Well, I actually, because I was younger than the other children, I was not even bar mitzvahed yet. I think I must have been 12.
You were 12, a 12-year-old rabbi. Yes.
Yes, but just for one day.
But at 12, well, I understand. But a day is nonetheless, a day is the entire life of a butterfly. So you just, you can't stress the idea of longevity is very much relative. This, at the age of 12, was already your second career. What was your first career, which you had started a year prior?
I was extraordinarily entrepreneurial from an extremely young age. I was putting on carnivals at the age of 9 or 10, where we would have rides and games. And my first year, I would charge admission and invite everyone in the neighborhood and beyond to come. And after my first year, I quickly learned that all of the profit was in the sale of concessions, the popcorn, the candy, the lemonade. So in subsequent years, when
if I could just interrupt for a moment,
yes.
You're putting on a carnival. You're what, 11 years old?
I was probably younger.
Yeah. Where did the amusement park rides, how did they manifest themselves?
They were in my backyard.
Okay. And what did the rides consist of?
Oh my goodness, it's hard to remember. We had tetherball and croquet, and I think badminton.
Okay, got it. Now I'm getting a sense.
Hard to remember, but the crucial lesson that I learned is all the profit was in concessions. Yeah. So thereafter, every year, I made admission to the carnival for free in order to increase attendance and boost the concession revenue.
Yeah. And the concession revenue was what? What were the concessions?
Lemonade, candy, popcorn.
Yeah.
Whatever kids would buy.
So you'd buy a candy bar from the local store and then double the price?
Something along that line.
Yeah.
But the idea is I was enterprising, and B, I very quickly learned how to what they now call monetizing the enterprise. And at 11, I made my show business debut as a professional magician. So that was all before the rabbi incident.
Right, that's what I meant. As a rabbi, you were already far along in your entertainment career.
Kinda, yeah. I didn't start to make very serious money as a magician until I was about 14.
Serious money being?
Oh, I used to earn enough in a weekend if I worked as many as 4 shows, which meant 4 shirts. If I could work 4 shows in a weekend, I made enough money from that alone to afford a mortgage on a house in my hometown at that time.
This is totally nuts. But
I got a lot of jealousy and some anger from my competitors in the Magicians Union.
Yeah.
The Guild, because I put on shows that were 2 to 3 times longer and charged less than they did. I was going for volume business.
So
just like with the concessions.
You're kind of like in the early days, the Airbnb of the magician industry.
I don't know what that means.
It means that you offer a product that's ostensibly less than the hotels, but it's not really necessarily true anymore.
I come from an extraordinarily over-competitive family. Although I'm not sure I measured up to the standards, I certainly made an effort to do so.
Yes. You, like our prior guests, Inger Tudor, graduated from the Harvard Law School. I think I didn't even know it at the time, but it seems like being a graduate of the Harvard Law School seems to be a requirement for coming on to Animal Farm, being on the show. But
there are many people, Steve, who are far more intellectually adept than I, who probably didn't go to college.
Yeah.
You have to remember that when I was growing up, it was a distinct minority that even attended.
Yeah, sure.
And it was also extraordinarily common to find highly educated autodidacts and perceptive intellectuals among the working class.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about a story you had related to me earlier, and that's that when you were at law school, you ran into Merrick Garland.
No, I never met Merrick Garland.
Okay,
let's get it straight. Read one another.
You read one another because he was a theater critic. The current Attorney General of the United States was a theater critic for the Harvard Crimson. And
that is correct.
And you were a theater critic?
No, I was a movie critic.
A movie critic for
the Boston Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
But that was not where I began. I began film criticism. I was the founding critic of the Chicago Reader in 1971.
And that's when you were, what, like 13?
No, I was 20.
Oh, okay, okay.
But I was just coming off my first feature film that I made in Barcelona.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're actually, the Chicago Reader is celebrating in a couple weeks its 50th anniversary.
It's amazing that it's still there. That's just amazing.
Well, it is amazing, but I was also an investor in it, and it took about 30 years to get any money back. But if one is patient as an investor, some ships come in.
Yes, if you live long enough. If you live long enough, yeah.
Well, many don't.
So
many are lost at sea.
So you read. I'm going to go back to Merrick Garland. You read each other.
Yes. I would see productions he reviewed, and he would see movies that I saw.
You're the Chicago Reader, and then you were also.
I also was the founding film contributing editor and film critic for the Los Angeles Reader, which started in 1978.
Yes.
In fact, my presence in Los Angeles was part of the investors' motivation to start the paper here, which frankly was before the LA Weekly.
Yes, I know.
Although not by much.
Yeah. I think the LA Weekly was just getting going around 78, 79. So they were pretty close.
Yes, well, that's exactly why the Reader was founded. We heard about the LA Weekly starting up and said, oh, we can beat them to the street. We don't need as much preparation. Yeah. And it took us less than 4 weeks to open an office and get out a paper. It was reactive on our part, but we did beat them. Now, unfortunately, the Chicago Reader having become a great success, the owners were of the persuasion that it was probably more due to genius than good fortune, and therefore insisted on replicating everything in Los Angeles exactly the same as Chicago, which I kept warning them was a serious error. For example, in 1978, they wanted to be at the heart of the city, so they opened an office downtown and would not believe me when I told them that was not the center of the city.
Yeah. New Times made a similar kind of miscalculation, not quite understanding the city they rolled into.
Or being very interested.
Yeah, that's a common mistake.
And of course, New Times ended up swallowing both of us.
Yes.
And amusingly, the only antitrust case that was successfully brought by the George W. Bush administration Justice Department was against New Times over its acquisition of the Reader and the Weekly.
Interesting.
They picked on the small fry who were, counterculture.
Well, by the time I don't know, it wasn't the Justice Department. By the time the owners of the same publisher and editors had pretty much consumed the LA Weekly, and under the moniker Village Voice Media, they were then charged with, in a sort of helping human trafficking through the sex ads in the back of the paper. And I believe the editor even went to jail on those charges.
Oh, I didn't realize that had happened, but I certainly knew it was a.
You know who prosecuted him?
Serious controversy. I knew.
You know who prosecuted him?
No.
Kamala Harris.
Well.
So there you go.
Small world once again.
All the world's a stage and it's a small world. Those are the two cliches we were bandering about before the show started. You have been watching the LA theater scene for decades, as I have.
Well, I watch the theater scene wherever I live.
Right. Well, you
Part
lived
of
here.
life.
Exactly. So, my goodness, what's going on? What has changed? What has evolved and what has devolved?
Oh my goodness, that is such a challenging question.
Well, it's actually 5 questions, but there it is. You can pick.
That's part of the challenge.
You can pick any one of them.
The part of the problem, though, is anytime you answer a question of that stripe, you are ultimately speaking more about the changes wrought in oneself over the time period as much as anything else.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, with that that assertion of self-reflection.
Well, from my own personal perspective, starting out as a kid going to Broadway and then going to off-Broadway in the 60s, and then moving to Chicago and encountering Stuart Gordon and the organic theater. And I don't think Steppenwolf had started when I lived there quite yet. And there was Second City. And then I moved to Boston and used to hitchhike on Saturday mornings to get to Manhattan in time for matinees, which one could do.
Yeah.
So then I moved to Los Angeles, and I was expecting very little of the theater here, having all of the New York prejudices and blindnesses concerning culture here.
And just to clarify, we are talking circa 1978?
No, earlier, 74.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And among the very first discoveries I made, my first supper here was the Old Globe doing the entire corpus of Shakespeare.
This is in San Diego.
No.
You're talking about West Hollywood,
north of Santa Monica.
Okay.
And it was actually but shaped like the Old Globe at the time. Yep. It had a dome.
Yes.
And they were doing the complete works of Shakespeare, which they successfully completed. And the first production I ever saw there was really emblematic of the Los Angeles theatrical experience. It was King Lear.
Yeah.
And the star was George Coulouris, who was best known for many decades as being a horror movie heavy.
Yeah.
But was a serious classical actor.
Yeah.
And this did a great deal both to amuse me and to dispel the notion that the Philistinism was what it appeared to be.
Yeah.
And in fact, behind it were many serious and committed artistic drives.
Mm-hmm.
I also have early memories of seeing Richard Chamberlain and Night of the Iguana at the Amundsen, which was a highly artistically successful production. And I remember discovering, especially the Inner City Cultural Center, that had an enormous impact on me.
Yes.
And I was drawn to them because they were doing Fernando Arrabal plays. And I was a big fan of Arrabal's going back, actually, to my first time in Paris when I saw his first film, Viva la Muerte. And there were many things that Bernard did there that I just adored. And so I very quickly realized that there was action happening here and one had to go and find it. I have very fond memories of, I believe, oh my goodness, Band of Angels, I believe, when it was on Robertson doing After the Fall with Harris Yulin and Julie Cobb.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I got hooked pretty early on the local theater scene, even though I was a movie.
I'm going to take my earlier questions one at a time, and that's what has evolved? That's the first question. In your estimation over the decades, what has actually improved?
Well, for a long, long time, just about everything. I was both lucky and unlucky. I arrived in Los Angeles just at the very tail end of its existence as a provincial city, and just at the last moment before it began to transform itself into a cosmopolitan metropolis. And so being present for that overall transition was a enlightening experience. I found it taught me to work as hard as possible to purge prejudgments and prejudices, which of course are the same word. And I certainly enjoyed the city's improvement. The theater scene became, especially after the 99 seat agreement, which was what year again?
Oh, the very first one. There were a series of them.
Yeah, but once that started kicking in, the number of venues started to increase.
Yeah.
And the more theater there was, somewhat counterintuitively, the better it got.
Isn't that interesting? Because so many, I hear the complaint at some point where by the time I arrived at the LA Weekly, is that our problem is, this was the conventional wisdom, there's just too many theaters here, and they're driving, the audiences don't know where to go. And
well, that was true, but it doesn't contradict what I just said.
Yes, that it got better.
No, you have to understand that
and because there's fewer theaters,
in all eras, most art is bad.
Right.
This is always true.
And but also, I just want to say, there's no equation there that says if you have fewer theaters, the quality is going to go up.
Actually, I think it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Let 1,000 flowers bloom. The more theaters there are, the more bad theater there will be. But at the same token, there will be far more good theater.
Yeah. And then the theory being, let the market determine, drive the audiences to the good theater, whatever that is.
Yeah, although I have never embraced that idea. In fact, I operate in contradiction to that perception.
So, who determines what's good theater? Who has the right? Who has the
right? Anybody with a seat.
All right. That's a very populist view.
I don't know. I actually consider it an elitist view, but I do consider that anybody who is a participant in the process, and I fervently believe that the audience is an absolutely essential component of good theater. I think anyone who participates in the process belongs to an elite. by self-selection.
Yes.
So I may have a democratic view, but it's not really market-based.
Okay. Okay. Because the audience is self-selecting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And by choosing to be present, they have become an elite.
They
Just
become the
by
arbiter.
choosing to be on a stage, you are electing to aspire to an elite.
Okay, now the other side of the coin, what has devolved?
Well, conditions have gotten very, very unfavorable for managing to do anything. We're seeing a lot more plays with smaller casts. We're seeing shorter seasons. I assume that many companies we're fond of are either have or will fall by the wayside.
Because the cost of putting on a production now?
Yes,
the rising
compounded by the hit of COVID.
Yeah.
No, I tend to be pessimistic about the future, generally speaking.
Were you always such?
Probably so.
Okay.
The nice thing about being a pessimist is you have so many opportunities to be wrong.
Yeah. So you see a decrease. What was once a land of opportunity is no longer such. That's the big devolution. Is that
well? The trend is not promising or favorable, but I suppose I'm a closet optimist in my faith that people's passions will find a way.
Yeah.
And I actually do believe that. But my realistic self tends to suppress that.
Understand. Any closing remarks about the state of things in Los Angeles and what is happening as our theaters weather the COVID storm?
Well, if I may, I would prefer to close on another subject entirely.
All right. Why not? It's your show.
What I would like, no, it's your show, Steve.
I understand.
I'm just a guest.
You're the guest. I'm a hospitable host. You may set the tone.
That's because of your Muslim adherence. No, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I consider the higher functions of criticism, particularly in the theater. I have this, I didn't become a film critic until I was 60 years old. I mean, a theater critic. Excuse me, let me restart. I did not become a theater critic until I was 60 years old. So for me, it represented an extraordinary opportunity that I was slow to recognize, to recharge my batteries by having new ideas and learning to come up with a vocabulary and a mode of expression to convey those ideas that were new to me. And what I discovered in my experience, my relatively brief career as a theater critic, was that although people enjoy praise and need validation, what the theater community craves, I believe, above all else, and I think this is emblematic of maybe life in general, but certainly other arts, they crave being understood. And the recognition that there is someone out there who is articulating with some passion, one hopes, an understanding of what they're trying to do. Whether they succeed or fail, it really doesn't matter. But that for me to endeavor in my role to be that understanding auditor is the most important function that I can perform.
Mm-hmm. To be understood. So the motives of creation are understood.
Yes, I get what they're trying to do.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's not a form of intimacy, but a form of communion.
Myron, Meisel, thanks for joining us.
Adios.
Next week, we're joined by Erin Aubrey Kaplan, who is a Los Angeles-based journalist and columnist. She's written about African American political, economic, and cultural issues since 1992. And she's been an essayist and theater critic for the LA Weekly. She's been a contributing opinion writer for both the Los Angeles Times and now currently the New York Times.